welcome to Garden Style. So today I thought I would do a Q&A with you guys and share some information with you regarding some questions that have been asked of me over the last several months. So let's get started. The very first question was what zone I am in, and I am actually in zone 8. Now zone 8 is kind of a mild, kind of midstream temperatures that we get here. Our temperatures usually don't get below 10 degrees during the winter time and usually don't get above 95 in the summertime. However, there's always exceptions to those rules because, as we all know, Mother Nature has her own way of doing things. But it's a rare event. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it get below 10 degrees here in my zone, in zone 8. So it's actually a really awesome growing zone, for me anyway. I have a longer growing season and I can grow probably a larger variety of plants than, say, someone who lives in zone 5. Now zone 5 you can easily get down to 0 degrees, and you're seeing extreme temperatures up into the hundreds during the summertime. So the lower the zone, the colder your temps are. The higher your zone, the warmer your temps are. So in zone 8 it's just kind of like almost right in the middle there. So a lot of the plants I discuss with you are okay in zone 8. And possibly what I like to do is purchase plants that are actually 2 zones below my own zone, especially during the winter time. And that way I can be sure that they're hardy enough to make it through a really harsh winter, as well as a really hot summer. So it's a good idea to keep that in mind when you're out shopping for plants. Always read your tags. And if they say, you know, from zones 5 to zone 9, you're pretty safe if you live in like a zone 7 or a zone 8 as far as those plants go. And there are lots of plants out there, and of course I always encourage folks to look into native plants that just grow naturally in their area, out in the woods or out in the prairie, just depending on where it is you live, because you will find those plants you have to fuss with a lot less. But in answer to your question, yes, I live in zone 8. Another question that I received is what type of mulch do I use? Now here in the Northwest we have lots of trees, so we use a composted bark mulch here in my area. That seems to be readily available, and I have it delivered by the truckload due to the fact that my yard is so huge. But depending on what area you live in, it's always a good idea to call around and see what type of mulches are available in your area. And I use a composted bark mulch. It's not just a straight bark, just due to the fact it's just a bunch of wood chips that are sitting on top of the ground. But when I use a composted bark mulch, that is so helpful in not only protecting your plants, but it also feeds your plants at the same time, because a good portion of it is composted already, and it'll help break down into the soil that you are planting in, and actually helps add nutrients and all sorts of good things to your soil. So that the following year, when you go to plant in it, you actually, after about 3 or 4 years, I've already noticed here in my yard that the soil is just very rich and dark. It holds moisture better. It also helps protect your plants during the winter time, helps hold moisture in during the summer. So mulch just serves a huge line of purposes when it comes to the garden. The main purpose I use mulch in here is not only to feed my plants, but also to keep the weeds down. Now, is it 100% weed proof? No, at least not in my area. As soon as we get a rain during the summertime, I might see a few weeds pop through because they just like to reseed themselves right on top of this composted bark mulch, but they're also super easy to pull. So yeah, that's the kind of mulch I use. Now, for those of you who have a lot of pine trees in your area, you may find that there is a composted pine mulch that you can use, and that works great. I have several pine trees just here in my yard, and I find it's just like a perfect mulch during the winter time. It also helps to hold the moisture in. So if you have some of that naturally in your yard, by all means use it. It's just a nice natural mulch that you can use. Now, as we start to approach fall, I can't believe I'm saying this already, as we get into September, October, and the leaves start dropping from the trees, that's another perfect mulch that you can use. Rather than throwing all those leaves away, run over them with a lawnmower, crush them up, and use them as a mulch around your plants. Especially if you live in a really cold zone, it's a real good idea to collect these up and just pile them up around the bases of your plants. And that not only protects the roots, but it also helps protect against frost heave. And frost heave happens when there's no mulch at all around your plants. You get real super cold temperatures, and it actually freezes the top 3 or 4 inches of the soil surface, and that will actually cause it to raise up on your plants. And I've seen this here on a couple of occasions where it's just got really cold and there was no mulch around the plants. And frost heave is really bad for the roots. That's where it can start to damage the roots of the plant. And most gardeners who are out there know that the most active time of the year for plants to really get their roots in is during the winter time, when they're not using all their energy going into their leaves and flowers during the spring and the summer. In the winter time, the whole top area of that plant actually goes dormant, but their roots are very much alive and are very busy during the winter time, getting down into the ground and getting themselves set and rooted properly. That's usually why it takes about a year or two for plants to get established in your yard. They need that winter time in order to get those roots really firmly planted in, and that results in a really healthy plant the following year during the spring and the summer. And you'll find you don't have to water them near as much once they get established. Okay, so here was a really good question, and this I think came about when I was edging for a new lawn that I was putting in the front yard. And I had somebody ask me, what is a half moon edger? This, my friends, is a half moon edger. And this is probably one of my favorite tools to use out in the garden, not only to help edge the edges of all my beds, because it only goes down this deep. It's not like you're digging out a hole of any kind, but it helps to cut the edges of the lawn so that it's not creeping back into your garden. And as we start to get into the middle of September, that is the perfect time to grab your half moon edger and freshen up the edges around your garden so that you don't have grass creeping and growing into your gardens during the winter time. Because again, grass is very active too during the winter time, whether you know it or not. It is also setting its roots in. And they spread by rhizomes, so to speak. They like to spread, as we all know. And you come out the next spring and suddenly you've got all this grass sitting in your gardens. So if you give it one last good edging during the fall, that helps to hold that back, and they aren't near as messy during the spring when you're trying to get cleaned up. So that is a half moon edger, and they're fabulous. And I thought I would show you another tool that has become a big favorite of mine, and this is what they call an action hoe. And this actually has sharp edges on both sides, and this is fantastic, especially in a vegetable garden, where you can run this along the top surface of the soil and it'll actually cut any of the weeds off. It helps to dig nice troughs. You can use it for edging as well. You just run it along the edge of your gardens. But I love this tool for just cleaning up gardens that are real weedy, or you just want to clean up some of the surface area. This is a fabulous little tool. If you don't have one, I highly recommend you go out and get one. I apologize for the way mine looks. You can tell it's years old, but it still holds up and it gets the job done. But you can tell this has been a well-used tool of mine. It's one of my favorites. Another one of my favorite tools, which I never leave the house without, and that is a good pair of pruners. And I swear by Felco. These are Swiss-made pruners. I have had these probably for the last 20 years, and you can hear that they could probably use a little WD-40 because they have definitely gotten a workout this summer. But this is another one of those tools that is well worth the investment. And they come in all different sizes. I have very small hands, and these fit my hands perfectly. And what I'm doing is, usually when I'm out watering, I usually have a pair of these sitting in my back pocket all the time when I'm out in the garden, because you never know when you come across something that needs a snipping or something that needs to be trimmed. I use it to cut flowers, and I just find these to be awesome. And by the fall time, I'm usually taking these, giving them a good dose of WD-40 so they're not all squeaky, and I sharpen them. And if you sharpen them at least once or twice a year, or if you find you're pruning a lot during the spring and the summer, it's a good idea to keep them real sharp so that you have sharp edges, they're not shredding the branches, and you will find you will have these for years. I have had these for at least 20 years, and I actually have different size blades that I purchase. Usually a size 8 for my hand, but you can get short pruners that are good for pruning flowers or cutting flowers, and you can get really long ones that can actually handle larger branches if you're pruning trees and shrubs. But another one of my favorite tools is a pair of pruners. And of course, your standard everyday scissors. Nice pair of sharp scissors is always a good idea for smaller plants like grasses, small flowers, that sort of thing, for cutting and trimming. So never leave the house without those either. I always get something sharp sitting in my pocket. So just thought I would share that with you. Now, another good question that was brought to my attention is, when is the good time to start edging your lawn after the summer? You'll find me starting to edge my lawn one last time probably about the middle to the end of September. 15th of September usually sends off alarm bells for me and lets me know that, okay, it's time to start thinking about fall. It's time to start prepping your yard for fall. So that was a really good question. So yes, you can start edging your yard in September. Another good question was, when do I prune my lavender? Here in Zone 8 in my area, usually you want to start pruning your lavender towards the end of August. Now, I live in a pretty tepid zone, but if you live in a really cold zone, and I would say probably zone 6 and below, you want to do the trimming on your lavender in the early spring. As soon as you start to see new growth starting to show up on your lavender, that is the best time to prune it. I don't recommend pruning your lavender in the late summer or the early fall if you live in a really cold zone, because of course as soon as you prune lavender or any other type of shrublet, it's telling it to start sending out new growth. I can get away with that here in my zone, in Zone 8, due to the fact that we don't start to see really cold, hard frosts until about November, December. So I give them one last pruning at the end of August, possibly the first week of September, but you don't want to wait too long, just because there's a real short timeline in there. They'll send out a little bit of new growth, but then they will just naturally start to go dormant once the temperatures start to drop. So if you live in a little bit milder zone, I would say 7 or 8 or above, it's perfectly okay to start pruning your lavender towards the end of August, as soon as you see the flowers are starting to fade on your lavender, unless of course you've harvested all your flowers earlier. When you go to harvest lavender flowers, usually you do that as soon as you see they're starting to open up their buds. They start with a closed purple bud, and that is usually the best time to start pruning them. Just like herbs, just before those flowers start to open, go ahead and start cutting them. And as you know, there's so many uses for lavender, anywhere from eating them in ice cream to making lavender sachets, just because it smells good. It's very soothing. That would be the best time to prune the flowers off your lavender. Now, when you're going to prune lavender one last time for the year, you only want to cut maybe a third of the plant off. You don't want to go down into the woody part of the plant. Lavenders can't handle that. As soon as you cut the woody part, it's not going to grow back in that particular spot. But if you go down about a third of the plant and you're still in some of that new growth, you can snip that off and just make a nice pretty mound on top of the lavender shrub. You'll see that it has just a natural shape to it, and it'll come right back and give you twice as many blooms the following year. And I usually prune my lavender twice. I'll do it in the early spring to encourage lots of new growth, and then I'll do it again in late August just to clean them up, take off all the dead flowers, and just make them nice and pretty again when they're sitting out in the garden. Another really good question was, when can I start to reseed my lawn? Whenever we go to reseed our lawns, fall is the best time to reseed a lawn or even start a brand new lawn. And the reason for that is there's more moisture. You're starting to see more rain coming from Mother Nature, so you're not having to sprinkle it all the time. And the temperatures are cooler. Once the temperatures start to cool down into, say, the 60s, mid-60s, perfect time to get out there and start reseeding a lawn, reseeding any bare patches you may have, or even starting a brand new lawn. So I would say middle to end of September, at least here in my zone, is a perfect time to start reseeding your lawn. When can I plant again? Trust me, we're all asking that question right now. September 15th, there you go. Just depending on what zone you live in. You might even be able to start earlier if you live in a cooler zone. Here in my zone, in Zone 8, we usually start to see cooler temperatures and a little bit more rainfall as we get into the middle of September. Now, that's not to say I don't start planting some of my fall perennials right now. And things like rudbeckia, coneflowers, asters, sedums, a lot of those late fall blooming perennials you can plant now. Just keep in mind you may have to babysit them while we still have some warm temperatures and make sure that they stay wet. But we're getting closer and closer to that time where you're actually pretty safe. By the time the middle of September rolls around, just about for any zone, you can plant any kind of deciduous trees and evergreens, which is wonderful. So you can plant things like Japanese maples, maple trees, evergreens, fir trees. Any of your trees and shrubs will do great if you wait until the fall to start planting. So September 15th, just have that date stuck in your mind and know that you're perfectly safe to plant any deciduous shrubs or evergreens. And in fact, I highly recommend it. It gives them a month or two to get down into the dirt, get their roots in. Definitely want to mulch them if you live in a much colder zone. And you will find that they will be awesome by the next spring because they have spent that entire winter getting their roots in. And you don't have to fuss with them and fight with them near as much in the spring and the summer of the following year because they've already had a few months to get their roots in. So it's a great time to be transplanting and planting any kind of deciduous shrubs and evergreens. Okay, another really good question was roses. You can prune your roses one last time. In fact, I highly recommend you do it now so that you can get a beautiful flush of roses in the fall. Now, roses are fantastic for knowing when temperatures are getting cooler and going dormant all on their own. But what you can do to help them during a really cold winter is once you prune them now through the first, second week of September, you just back off, don't cut them anymore. And once you see those temperatures are starting to get really cold and you're getting really close to your first frost, just leave the flowers on your rose bushes until they start to fall off and they leave what they call rose hips on the shrubs. When you leave those rose hips on your shrubs, that is sending a signal to your rose bushes to shut down and go dormant for the wintertime. And there are some varieties of roses that absolutely look beautiful with the rose hips still attached, because a lot of times they'll turn colors. There'll be oranges and reds still left on the shrubs, which is awesome. Leaves a little extra late fall, early winter color still on the shrubs. And then just let them go. Stop cutting them. Don't want to be pruning them anymore. So you don't want any more new growth coming up on them and then have them get zapped once your winters start to get really cold. So there's a few questions for you. I see one more here that I'm going to answer real fast. And that is, how do I water my succulents? Well, it all depends. If you have your succulents sitting in a container that has no drainage in the bottom, like a couple of them that I showed you in a couple earlier videos when it came to planting succulents, I have a squirt bottle. And I actually squirt water in between the succulents without getting water actually on the leaves. It's a real good idea not to have water sitting on your succulent leaves. Now let's say you have your succulents sitting in a pot that does have drainage. I go ahead and water them just like I normally would with any other plant. I just try not to get water on the leaves and water in between the plants that are sitting in the pot. And that's all there is to it. And I only water mine once a week if it's really, really hot, once or twice a month if it's not. Succulents are really forgiving that way. And that's why their leaves are so thick, is they store all that water in their leaves, so they don't need near as much water as some of your other potted plants may need. So hopefully that answers a good portion of your questions. And of course, any other questions you can think of that I haven't answered or have been able to touch on in some of my previous videos, by all means ask me, because I'm starting to collect them as you guys are asking them, just for this reason, so that I can shoot out a video and hopefully answer some questions and keep you inspired to get out there and get your hands dirty. All right, you guys, my next video is going to be in September, and I can't believe it. Fall is on the way, and I will be talking a lot more about what we can do in our gardens during the month of September. Meanwhile, I hope all of you enjoyed this video, answered some questions for you, and of course, anything you need at all, any questions at all, you can get a hold of me at GardnStyleNW.com or my email at GardnStyleNwest@gmail.com. Otherwise, comments are always welcome. Love hearing from you guys, and I certainly appreciate all of you, especially our new subscribers that have just joined. As you're in for a real education as we start to go into the fall and the winter in our gardens. All right, we'll talk at you next week. Bye for now.